What's up, y'all? Excited to have another video for you guys. The purpose of this channel is to improve people's day-to-day lives through advocacy and education. So really just trying to create positive change in the world so that way this place, this earth that we are all on, is just a better place for all of us. So that's really the purpose of this channel. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely subscribe and definitely like this video so that way YouTube knows that you want to see more of this type of content. This video will actually be part of a 3-part series in which I talk about the economic context of African Americans within the United States. This context really does begin with the transatlantic slave trade, but African or Black history does not end and begin with slavery in the United States. It's a very vast history. In fact, we have traced the first human beings to have come from Africa. So literally, African history is world history and Black history is American history. So that being said, I don't want to just breeze past the vast African history prior to the slave trade. The richest man in history is actually Mansa Musa, who was the king of the Mali Empire, whose estimated net worth was around $400 billion. To put that in context, the richest person in the world right now is actually Jeff Bezos, and his estimated net worth is around $188 billion. So literally twice as much wealth as Jeff Bezos has now today is what Mansa Musa had in the Mali Empire in Africa. You had African astronomers making advances in astronomy that we still are not sure how they even understood the things that they understood at the time with the technology that they had to their disposal. We have Egyptian scholars who developed geometric equations which help the rest of the world understand how the world works and how to interact with the world. All throughout different parts in Africa, there were developments in medicine in which they were able to produce and cultivate different plants that had antibacterial, antiviral, and anti-cancer properties. And so there were a lot of different advances in medicine, all before the arrival and colonization of Europeans in Africa. All that to say that African history is vast, it's rich, and it doesn't start and end with the Atlantic slave trade. That actually only happened in a very brief amount of time in the context of the history of the human species, which we know comes from Africa. And so just want to give that context to say that the Atlantic slave trade is not the end-all be-all of African history. However, it is the starting point of Africans in the United States when the first enslaved peoples from Africa were brought over to what is now the United States in 1619. And ever since that time, there's been an economic oppression of Black people in the United States. So slavery did not start and did not come from Europeans. In ancient times, you had different tribes or kingdoms or whoever, different peoples going to war, fighting each other, and having conflicts. And the way that the people who are the survivors of those conflicts or the people who are defeated, those people would then become enslaved. They would have to trade their labor and give their labor for free in order to enrich and empower the people who had defeated them or who had bought them. So slavery has always been around. It's not a new concept. It's not something that Europeans invented. It's important to know that the basis of slavery has always been economic in nature. Basically, you can take the free and forced labor of another people and use it to enrich yourself. There are many examples of how this played out in history. The Roman Empire, the Egyptian Empire, pretty much every people in history has either had slaves or been slaves. And so the context, again, of this slave trade was always economic in nature. That's the way slavery was from the beginning. Now, the justification of slavery in the context of Europeans was actually based on Christianity. It was thought that if people were not Christians, then it is okay for them to be slaves. But if they are Christians, then it's not okay for them to be slaves because you don't want to do that to the people who follow the same God as you. So it was used as a justification, just like religion has been used for justification for all sorts of evils throughout history. And later, they decided that race is going to be the deciding factor, that Black people or Africans in the Americas were going to be enslaved simply because they were a different race. And once they actually adopted the Christian religion, they were still enslaved because of their race, instead of what the original justification was of religion. So all of this is just context to understand why this slave trade was happening, how it took place. And that's really just a brief summary. There's a lot that you can dive into. I've learned a lot from just exploring this topic. So as I said, the basis and the reason for slavery has always been economics. So as the transatlantic slave trade progressed, you have more and more African people in what is now the United States who are this free labor force in a new land, where a land that's new to Europeans because Native Americans were already here, where there's a lot of potential to cultivate the land and use the land to produce. So now you have this free labor force that's able to propel the United States to having one of the strongest economies in the world after the American Revolution. And so really the whole basis for the US economy was based around slavery in its inception. So you had millions of enslaved peoples who were able to produce things far cheaper than any other competitor out there. The primary resource that was produced by enslaved people was cotton, and we know this after the invention of the cotton gin. The production of cotton in America exploded, and this was on the backs of enslaved people. But we also know that that is not all that enslaved Africans did in the United States. They were not just unskilled laborers who just picked cotton. We know that Africans in this country were very highly skilled individuals in a lot of different fields. They were captains, nurses, blacksmiths, tailors, all types of skilled workers. They were inventors. So they weren't just producing physical labor. They were actually producing skilled labor, and they invented things. They produced intellectual property, which was then exploited, because during that time, even if you were a freed African living in the United States, you still were denied the opportunity to have patents. You still were denied the opportunity to pursue your economic interests. So a few examples of things invented by Africans during slavery was that Benjamin Bradley invented a steam engine for warships that actually helped the US Navy. Another example is Norbert Rieu actually invented a process for evaporating sugar that's actually still used to this day. So all this to say that the economic value that African people added to the context of the United States growth and rise to power is immeasurable. So you literally have a free labor force who is not only doing the most grueling and brutal labor at the time, but also who is skilled and intelligent. So you have all these things that African people are producing for free to really build up this nation. So the entire context of this nation is rooted in slavery. And it's important that we understand this and explore this, because Black history and American history are the same thing. You would not have what we know as the United States today if it were not for the forced labor, the blood, sweat, and tears, and the lives of African people in this country. Slave labor was used to build the White House. Slave labor was used to build the US Capitol building. It was used to build Wall Street in New York, and pretty much all of New York City was built by slave labor. So as I stated earlier, as slavery in the United States progressed, religion could no longer be used as a justification for enslaving these African peoples. It later transferred into racism, saying that Black people were simply inferior, less intelligent, that slavery was somehow beneficial to the Black person because it gave them a purpose. All these lies that were used to justify and to continue to perpetuate slavery and to basically enrich white people at the time. So the slave trade and slavery in the United States is the first component of the economic exploitation of African peoples within this United States. It started in 1619 when the first enslaved people were brought to this land, and slavery in this form ended in 1865. But as I'll explain in the next parts of this series, the economic exploitation of African people did not end once the 13th Amendment was passed in 1865. In fact, slavery itself did not even end. It was simply that form of slavery that ended in 1865. So be on the lookout for that next video explaining the context of economic exploitation of Black people in the United States after the 13th Amendment, after chattel slavery is ended. Again, African history and Black history does not start with slavery, but it is important to know what that context is. It's important to know that that was economic in nature, that it was economic exploitation of Black people, and that it's still going on and we still see the effects of that today, which I will definitely talk about in these next couple videos that I'll have for y'all. What I learned from exploring this is that this is a vast subject, that there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to dive into. There may be some things that I did not quite get right, and there definitely are things that I still want to learn more about. And I encourage you all to look into these things. There are extensive resources to find out more for yourself, and I encourage you all to do that. Now, that being said, I hope that you learned something from this video. If there's anything that you disagree with or you think that would add to the context of this, definitely let me know in the comments. Hope you all enjoyed this video. Definitely like and subscribe if you want to hear more of this content, and I will catch you next time.